the idea of giving this talk actually came about a year ago, when almost every day in the press, on the television, all over the place, there were stories about the robots are coming, taking over the planet. We should all be very worried. And as Peter was mentioning, this book, The Rise of the Robots, came out, which grabbed everyone's attention and was recently the #1 Financial Times Book of the Year. So I went in actually to buy a copy last week, and they're all sold out completely. They're going to have to reprint them. That's how big an impact it's had. So I was reading this book, and almost every page I was saying, well, when does the good news start? And I didn't find any. So I'll just hit you with the bad news. So this is the jobs warning. So this is actually from the Bank of England, based on this book and various other research that was done. So they're saying that 80 million Americans and 50 million British jobs could be at risk over the next 10 to 20 years because of machines. So that's 50% of the workforce. That's a staggering number of people. So I don't know if everyone has heard about this before or if it's news to you, but as I said, this is the bad news, and it just gets worse. So the jobs that are high risk are routine, predictable, and repetitive. So it used to be, you used to think about menial jobs or kind of low-grade jobs that were being taken over by robots. But now it is anything that's routine, even if it's actually quite a high-skill thing. If it's routine, predictable, and repetitive, you may have a problem. And a good description I saw is that if someone intelligent was to sit and watch you doing your job for a period of time, could they do your job? Or if they looked at previous examples of work you'd done in the past, could they do your job? And if the answer is yes to either of those questions, your job is at some risk. So there's a big study done by Oxford University where they looked at over 700 jobs, 702 job categories. And they did this on behalf of the US government. And then they ranked each one of those jobs in terms of the probability that that job could be taken over by either a software or hardware robot. So I've listed these in the order of the most likely thing to go. So telemarketers are way up there, most likely job to go. Title examiners, abstractors, searchers, anyone who does that kind of information gathering, they've had it. Hand sewers, we can imagine them going. Obvious one at 691, data entry keyers. We can all imagine that those jobs are just could go. You could be talking straight into your computer, all sorts of things. So those are the jobs that are most likely to go. If you look at the ones least likely to go, the interesting thing about all of those is that typically they're to do with interacting with humans. So we have things like therapists, a lot of those. We have surgeons, nutritionists, lots of people who spend their time talking to humans and having to understand their emotions, which is something that at the moment they don't think the computers will be able to do. Just out of interest, the first IT job that shows up on the list is number 32. So that's a business analyst. So there's still some jobs for IT people, so that's the good news there. So this is just a list of the job categories. But if you then multiply by the number of people that do these jobs, that is where you then get into the number of people who might be made redundant. So if you imagine how many data entry clerks there are at the moment in the world, lots. It's not likely that these people could retrain as choreographers, which looks like a big growth industry of the future. And if you look at all the skills, it's the same. You've got high volume workers losing jobs and very low volume employers taking over. So hence the potential of 50% of people losing work. So I don't know how many people are business people here and not IT people, but I had to put this in anyway. So Moore's Law, all IT people know about it. Gordon Moore saying in 1965 that the number of components on an integrated circuit would double every year. They actually revised that to doubling every 2 years, but that's a substantial growth. And for the older people, like me, I hate to say, this is a Cray 2 computer from 1990. And back in those days, I had the fastest PC you could get on my desk, and I was using it for finite element analysis. And I used to set off a job at 5 o'clock at night and hope by the next day it had finished. And I used to dream of owning a Cray 2, because this would do the same thing in probably less than a minute. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could have that kind of power? So we fast forward to 2010, the equivalent to that today is an iPad 2. It has almost the same power as that Cray did, which would fill a big part of this room and needed a separate air or water cooling system for it. And obviously we have the iPad 3 now and all sorts of things. So it's a staggering move forward. And for people that haven't seen that kind of shift before, if I show you a modern computer that fills a room, you can just imagine in 20 years' time it might be the size of an iPad. So that's something to think about. So because of Moore's law, the cost, the size, the accuracy of the hardware has improved dramatically over the years. And this picture is a picture of a thing called Baxter. I don't know if any of you have seen it before. But Baxter is considered a bit of a game changer because it's a very low cost robot. It's about £15,000 for one of these. But the main thing about Baxter is you don't need a programmer, a traditional programmer, to actually teach it to do things. The arms you can move around yourself. You can move it to a starting point and say, learn, this is the starting point. You can move it to another point, say, this is where you pick a thing up. You can show it what the thing it's meant to pick up looks like. You can train it to do that. But all of those things can be done by a technician without the need for a programmer. So actually, I've got a video of this that we'll attempt to have a look at. What the video shows is Baxter a year ago and Baxter now. It's actually the same hardware, but a software upgrade. And it'll just show you the sort of thing that Baxter is capable of doing. So the difference between the 2013 and 14 is obvious. I mean, it's so much quicker, it identifies the parts a lot quicker, is doing the loading significantly faster. But I'll stop it at that point. So some interesting things there. They put an iPad on its face, or given it a face. I mean, it's quite strange, but I've seen this a few times, and you almost think of it as a human doing this kind of work. And it does have expressions of it's confused, it looks confused, and all those kind of things. Obviously not a very exciting job to have, just picking things up, moving it and dropping it down again, but humans do work like that. And Baxter can replace them. As I said, about £15,000 per unit.
And it's got some vision. I mean, it can actually see.
It does have vision, so it actually sees the thing it's going to pick up, it can identify it, it will pick it up. You know, so it doesn't have to know exactly where to find that item. So the next I was going to show is Asimo, which again, all the IT people will have seen Asimo. But I can remember 10 years ago when Honda first started looking at Asimo. It used to be just a pair of legs that would try and walk, and it would pretty much fall over most of the time. Fairly unimpressive. This is a video from a month ago, and it just shows you how it's all moved on a bit. So I saw a few eyebrows moving to see
Right, great job, Asimo. Thank you.
Off hopping on one leg. It's pretty impressive. I've shown this to a few people recently, and it's almost freaked them out. He said, you can imagine 100,000 of these coming at you with guns. That's what they say. Well, why not? I mean, it's extremely lifelike, and I've also seen demonstrations of Asimo now walking up and down stairs. You can run as fast as we can. The Honda are hoping that by 2020, Asimo will be the main ambassador for the Olympic Games in Tokyo. So this will meet and greet you and talk to you in your own language and give you directions. And yeah, exactly. So it's something to look forward to. All of these videos, I'm just showing partial clips, but obviously, if you download the PowerPoint presentation, you can look at the full details of it. So that's Baxter. So what does that do for us? Okay, so this is Foxconn. I don't know if you know Foxconn at all. This is a company that does a lot of mass manufacturing of electronics. In particular, they make iPads. So these are some workers assembling things, doing the sort of thing that Baxter can do. Picking up items, maybe inserting one part, moving to the next person who then inserts another part. So what they've said And I'll move on to the next slide where I've got a static picture of that. So in fact, for me, the startling thing here is there's no lights because the robots don't need lights. There's no heating because they don't need that either. You can turn on production, turn off production at will. But they believe they can swap out 1,000 employees for one person. That's all they need to run this factory. So, I mean, it's just an alarming reduction in headcount. And it's also interesting that the robots like Baxter can compete with the cheapest Chinese labour you can get. So if they compete with them, they can, I mean, what does that mean for the rest of the world? The interesting thing is that Americans are hoping that because of things like Baxter, they may be able to move manufacturing back to America. So instead of manufacturing in China, you can manufacture in America. But you don't need any people to do it. So is that a step forward? The next one, I really like this. I've spent most of the past month looking on YouTube. In America, if you can't get a job, the guaranteed place you can get some work is flipping burgers, as they call it, at McDonald's. That's a safe job. You can always get that. If you're a student looking for some extra money, for example, that's the place to go. Problem was that McDonald's workers got together and said, we don't get paid enough, we want a minimum wage of $15 an hour. Otherwise, we're not going to work here anymore. So people have picked that up and they've gone off and saying, well, is there a technological solution to it?
Problems could still be solved with technology. Now with so many workers clamoring for higher pay, many other executives in the fast food market are also looking towards robots and advanced technology as their next new hires. Sure, a burger-making robot could cost millions to develop, but it would cure the problem of employee turnover and could even limit loss prevention, two of the biggest problems facing fast food restaurants today. One tech company called Market Machines has already made a robot that can crank out one burger every 10 seconds, and it can do things from mixing and grilling custom order meats and preparing and placing all the condiments right on the spot. Plus, McDonald's already published their plans to add another layer of touchscreen technology to the drive-thru window. The updated drive-thrus should start popping up around July of next year, and it's just one more advance that could be pushing entry-level employees out of a job. Eventually, if McDonald's could completely automate the connection between placing the order on a touch screen and producing the order with the robot, the fast food giant would be almost entirely independent of entry-level employees.
So that's pretty frightening as well. So it's saying even something as something cheap and cheerful as a McDonald's burger, maybe it's cheaper to make it with a computer and a robot than it is for a human to make it. Looking at the detail of what that company that's hoping to automate the process are doing, what they're hoping you can do is when you come in, you can say, do you want beef or do you want pork or a combination? Do you want it roughly ground or finely ground? Do you want it medium rare, etc.? What do you want on that burger? The cooking time, obviously, you have no control over. You just have to wait till it's cooked. But when you actually construct that, it's a 10-second job. So they think they can get to the point where you'll be able to order your burger and get a custom gourmet burger out the other end for less than a McDonald's costs at the moment.
And the thing I've been saying to Trevor is that we keep using this word robot, and into people's minds mostly comes the picture like Asimo, the Honda robot you saw, jumping around. But you look at the thing that actually did the burgers. It may not, you know, it's just a lot of arms and things waving around. That is a robot. There'll be lots of other different looking robots. And in the past we perhaps focused our minds too much on that they were going to be these humanoid robots.
So what about the software side of things, looking at software robots? So as Peter mentioned earlier, there's a belief we might be at some sort of tipping point. So the big three issues here, big data. Obviously we have large amounts of data that we're gathering for all sorts of reasons, which gives us large training data. We have lots of new smart algorithms to process all of that data. And as we've seen with the hardware, it's getting faster and faster all the time. So we've already, I mean, I'm sure Peter's got examples of clever algorithms he had in the past to work with data, but we didn't have enough data and we didn't have fast enough computers to make use of it. But the combination of these things all arriving at the same point, we can do some quite astonishing things. So these are probably the most commonly used examples of where software robots could replace humans. So radiologists, it takes 15 to 20 years to train as a radiologist. And a lot of that time is getting to the point where you can look at x-rays, or in the case of the histopathologist, looking at slides and looking for anomalies, looking for differences, looking for changes, looking for cells that you should be worried about. It's a hugely skilled job to do that. 3 years ago, software was capable of doing a better job than somebody with 20 years training. So we're already at the point where, in terms of interpreting this information, computers can do a better job than humans. So if you've spent 15 years of your life getting to the point of being a radiologist and an expert, it's pretty shocking to find out that job may not exist in 5 years' time. In a similar manner, and I think Peter mentions this later as well, accountants. Accountants in general, well, in America there are 400,000 certified public accountants who typically just take numbers, analyze them, and push out a set of results, where it's accounts or whatever it may be, tax information. So a variety of software companies have taken all of those rules and created pretty simple accounting systems, I have to be honest, that will replace what those CPAs will do for you. And then instead of getting, the CPA you can afford, you have a piece of software that is as good as the best CPA you could possibly hire. And we can all do that right now. And the same with lawyers. So in America, when you first graduate with your law degree, quite often you're involved in what's called discovery. So if there's a big lawsuit, someone will produce all of the documents that may be related to that lawsuit, and someone has to read all those documents and decide which ones are relevant and which ones are not. So that employs hundreds of thousands of US lawyers. So there's already software in place that will read that electronically and decide whether it's relevant to a case or not. So again, those entry-level legal jobs are going. So again, the older people in the room, but even the people who've done IT degrees, hopefully know about Deep Blue, which was created by IBM to try and create a chess system that would beat the world chess champion Garry Kasparov at the time. So they first played back in February '96, and Deep Blue lost 2-4. But then they created a system, Deeper Blue, in '97, had a rematch, and that was the first time that a IT system managed to beat the world chess champion. It was a pretty amazing time. I remember it, on all the news and stuff. So IBM decided to kind of come up with a new challenge. So it was a thing called the Jeopardy challenge, and I don't know if any of you know about this. Jeopardy is a game show that's on every weeknight in America. I used to live in the States, and we watched it every night. And it's really quite a good show. The first clip I'll show you is just to set the scene. And what you have is a computer, Watson, as he's known, playing these two people. There's Brad Rutter, who on that show has won $4.5 million. Okay? And another guy, Ken Jennings, who won $3.5 million. And he won 74 games in a row. And for people who've been at the BCS quiz night, these things are not easy. But these are the best quizzers in America. He was playing against, and he beat. He won 74 games in a row. So to try and have a computer competing with those is pretty astonishing.
And it was in real time.
It is. So let me just show you what the game looks like, just to get it started.
Here we go. Brad, if you're ready, make your first choice.
Let's take alternate meanings for 200, Alex.
Right, so this is what the board looks like in the game. And across the top you have categories, and then you have a value for a specific question. Obviously, the higher the value, the more difficult the question gets. The unusual thing about this is they give you the answer to a question, and you've got to come up with the question that gives you that answer. Sounds a bit confusing, but we'll have one example just to get you started. So this is a very easy one that we start with.
4-letter word for a vantage point.
So a 4-letter word that can mean a vantage point or a belief. Okay?
View.
Well done, well done. Yes, I am suitably impressed.
Or a belief. Brad.
So the answer is view. And what you're seeing here is that Watson, in the middle there, has said, I think the answer is view. I'm 70% confident that view is the right answer. And the white line is the threshold above which it will buzz in and try and answer it. So if it's not sure about the answer, it won't buzz. But if it is sure, it'll buzz in. Problem is, it's not quick enough in this case.
The view.
Yes.
After the first.
So this is a rather worried-looking developer thinking, wait a minute, maybe humans are really good at this, and I don't stand a chance. And we'll see how it progresses in a minute. I've got a brief clip here on minor problems. I won't show that clip, but in general, they find some very simple things that the system didn't know. So if you answer a question wrong, you lose that money. Okay? So you can very quickly get a negative number showing up. But one of the problems they found is that Watson didn't get to know when someone else had given the answer. So in the example I've got is that someone answers mosquito, and Watson says, which is wrong, and then Watson says, is the answer mosquito? Which obviously is a bit stupid. So they just added a feedback loop in there to say, here's other answers. So these graphs show what they're up against. All these dots in the top represent people who have won at Jeopardy. Okay? And what it's showing you at the top there is that you have to be at least 80% accurate, and the black ones are the champions who've come back and back and back. And to be one of those black dots, you're going to have to answer probably 70% of the questions. So answer the 70% of the questions and be at least 80% right. When they first started, that's the baseline at the bottom. As you can see, not really making much progress at all. They had this massive leap forward, which was a hardware thing. And then gradually over time they improved the software, which then took them up to the higher score. But if I show you the upgraded hardware, so this is the computing power. It had 2,880 Power 7 processors. So it's pretty much the equivalent of 3,000 PCs and 16 terabytes of RAM. And that's an astonishing amount of hardware. Part of the challenge was that they weren't allowed to access the internet because that would make it too easy. So what they had to do is load all the reference material into that 16 terabytes of RAM. So they had the entirety of Wikipedia sitting in memory. They had the whole of the IMDb, a database of all media, of films and things. They had WordNet. They had multiple dictionaries, multiple encyclopedias. They had the Bible. They had just almost anything they could get their hands on. They stuck into memory. It's pretty astonishing amount of data. So this all gets very confusing and complicated, but this is an overview of the system and what it does. So way over at the left-hand side, what it does is it takes the question, which in this case is an answer, sorry to confuse everyone, and it strips out the things that might be relevant in that. And from that, that's the area it calls question decomposition. It then moves to hypothesis, which is it goes through everything it can find in all of those databases I mentioned that may have some relationship to the keywords that it picked out. So then it moves on to scoring. And as it says here, there could be 100,000 different scorings it does. So it looks at how many links are there between the words I've got and the things that I've already found that may be an answer to this. And then once it puts all those together, it does a final merge to come up with a confidence ranking. But bear in mind, it's doing this in probably a tenth to 2 seconds. It's extremely fast. And when you see how complicated some of the questions get, it's an astonishing amount of processing to get to that stage. Any comments on that, Peter?
Well, I think it's just astonishing. I mean, one of the really interesting things is that there are umpteen algorithms and umpteen different kinds of algorithms. I mean, what they realized was that they effectively had to have lots of different experts, some of them attacking this problem from completely different directions, all coming in, and they found some way of combining the answers because they get them down to, is this a reasonable answer to this particular hypothesis and so on. So it's two separate things really: the cunning weighting of the learning and the sort of matching and scoring, and also the enormous flexibility you get from so many different algorithms. It's really, really interesting.
Yes, so if you go to the detailed video on this, pretty much what they do is set off more than 100 different agents simultaneously looking for an answer. So it's a massively parallel process. But then being able to actually get to the point where you have candidate answers and then merging those to come out with 3 potential answers is astonishing. So this shows the final outcome of that process.
The category is 19th century novelists. What?
So the way Jeopardy works is very complicated, but they're played over 2 days, and your winnings roll over to the next day. And then there's this thing called Final Jeopardy, and at the very end you've got a question, and you can gamble how much money you've got. So you could gamble everything. So, for example, you may be in a situation where you're way out ahead, but if you gamble everything and get the answer wrong, you lose. So you've got to have some kind of algorithm to decide how much you're going to be prepared to bet. The other thing is, it's a very difficult question. I think it is. Does anyone think they know the answer before clicking it? Not as easy as you, I think.
No.
No. Anyone? No.
Bram Stoker.
It's Bram Stoker. You've probably seen this before.
No.
But then you've got to answer in terms of a question. So who is Bram Stoker? Is what they're looking for. Well done. Suitably impressed.
To do then is preserve the lead, not take a big risk, especially with Final Jeopardy, because just like for humans, Final Jeopardy is hard for Watson.
Now we come to Watson, who is Bram Stoker, and the wager. Hello, 17,973, and a 2-day total.
So there you go. After 2 days of going through this quiz, that was the final score, 77,000 for Watson, and the 2 humans sitting on 20,000. And these are really the best quiz players in the whole of America. So it's pretty incredible. Something I actually found even more interesting than that was one of the early games. And this shows a mistake that they made. So what they did before they actually went to the game show, they had to prove to the producers that the computer was up to the job. So there is Watson, as I said earlier in the discussion, so that would probably fill most of this room, but in 20 years that would probably be the size of an iPad.
So I said I would talk a bit about the economics and economic impact. I've been sort of interested in economics for a long time. I've read quite a bit about it. I was fascinated by John Maynard Keynes and how he came up with ideas which at the time seemed totally revolutionary and then became completely normal. And it may be we have to, understand economics slightly differently because of this new situation. Well, the first thing is the graph that is in this book. Loss of manufacturing jobs with time is linear. It's down from roughly 30% in the US or UK, out from roughly 30% of the population after World War II to about 7%. And that, of course, parallels what happened in agriculture. Everybody probably knows that in the 1750s, something like 90% of the population was involved in agriculture. In the 1850s, with the first industrial revolution, it was down to about half of that, about 50% ballpark. It's now down to 5 or 10%. Well, that was agriculture. So here is the little sort of up and down twiddle, but basically this is linear. And this is not a logarithmic scale. You've got 30% up there, percentage of persons, and you've got down to sort of 10% or something like that. And here is 1930 across to 2010. Notice that China didn't start to figure till around here somewhere. Everybody might think that, they were expecting a graph that sort of went along and then China appeared and whoosh. No. This has been a long, steady decline. It's been so long and so sort of slow that people haven't really caught up with it. But it just shows how gradually manufacturing jobs are being replaced. The other thing is, it's often said that in the UK now we only make a tiny fraction of what we used to make. Not true. The output in 2007 was double that in 1958. But it was being built by machines with far fewer people. So think, for example, of those Nissan car assembly lines in the northeast of England. They are churning out masses of cars, but with very few people in the factory, compared to what used to happen back in the 60s when there was all these, those of you who can remember back to the 70s particularly, all the strikes and all the argument with the car workers who wanted more money, etc., etc. Well, this is the Foxconn thing all over again. Another very significant thing is that hourly wage rates decoupled for apparently long periods of economic history. Hourly wage rates roughly parallel rise in GDP. So in other words, as total national amount created goes up, the workers' share thereof also goes up. Sometime round about between 1980 and 1990, the wage rates no longer went up anything like as fast as the GDP. Somebody else was creaming off all this extra surplus created by the robots. And I guess the economic surplus by the robots goes mainly to what, the top 5%? The top 1% get most of that, of course. There's been quite a lot in the press of this business of inequality, and this is it. There you can see, this is around about 1980, ballpark. You see, this is the hourly compensation going off, hardly moving up at all. I mean, it's been said that the average median worker in the US is no better off than his parents 40 years before, or something like that. And that's what that is representing. It's a memory that things used to be in the good time after the First World War. The nation was getting steadily better off, and everybody was sharing in that. And suddenly, whoomph, productivity going on up. Another very worrying thing is this thing which is called jobless recovery. The jobs typically disappear during the so-called recovery. You cannot avoid there being booms and slumps, up and down, short-term ones. But every time, while it's in a boom, the unions and everybody in strong position to argue. While there's a slump and you get the recovery, everybody is so desperate to try and get back in and get a job. And what happens is that is the time when the companies retool and reinvest and computerize. But guess what? They retool for far fewer people. So you end up recovering to the same production level or above, but with far fewer employees. It keeps ratcheting. And as I was remarking before, the middle class jobs are being replaced, often being replaced by part-time low-wage jobs, which is worse still, the dreaded 0 hours contracts, which is a phrase we've got to learn latterly. And the distribution looks like an hourglass, which is what we were discussing earlier. And as Trevor said, predictable, largely repetitive, jobs are easily computerized, especially if there are lots of records. This Watson thing, don't be taken in purely by this thing, oh, it's got to have 2,800 processors, etc., etc. There are some things which are pure advances in machine learning theory combined with well-designed software. This thing can gobble up lots of records and use them for training. And in particular, it can gobble up lots of natural language records. One of, I think, the really big things that's made this possible. It used to be, for a long time in artificial intelligence, we were seduced by the idea of the ontology. Everybody had to put their records in a very special format so that the computer can understand. Well, you need a thing called WordNet to try and make the correspondence, but that combined with some learning ability, it seems to be that with Watson, they've got it to the stage, you can just feed in chunks and chunks and chunks of natural language stuff, and it can say, I understand this natural language, and that's a noun, that's a verb, I've met that before, I know where to put this relative to what, I know what links to put in so I can find it again. All that stuff. You can imagine, you can start shoveling in colossal amounts of stuff, and it isn't just holding it as garbage and not understanding it. It understands it. It can reuse it in different circumstances. That is the real cleverness of the Jeopardy thing. And I put down here, well, the obvious sort of jobs that fit this predictable, largely repetitive thing: sales, office admin, operator, secretary. But, you know, there's one hell of a lot of people who rely on just those kind of jobs. This has a massive effect within society. Examples, Trevor's already mentioned this. Apparently in the States there's a thing called TurboTax software developed by relatively few designers, or people like us, we hope. We're the ones who can have the really good job. One of the other things to note, delivered worldwide by zero-cost download. Once somebody really makes a breakthrough with a particular kind of software, the word gets around, people start downloading. The distribution, the takeover, absolutely colossal. It's amazing how rapidly it happens. There's this curious effect in software. It seems to be what I call the winner-takes-all effect. I can remember before Google, perhaps some of you are old enough to remember before Google, there were some other people trying to do the same thing, and they thought they'd got the market. Google came out with something smarter, everybody downloaded it, bang. So, not merely, don't just notice that tax accountants, and there are one hell of a lot of them in the States, are being put out of business by relatively few designers. Notice also the speed with which this thing can spread. Paralegal jobs, that's what Trevor referred to as well, done better obviously by Watson. Radiologists, that's what IBM are now working on. Now in my own area. In America, graduate TAs, the tradition usually, of course, is if you're at the bottom of the pile, you start with a low salary doing boring jobs and you work your way up, because you think you're going to get to the much higher jobs. But the sort of things they would rely on, machine marking of essays, can now be done by programs with the capabilities of Watson. Can also spot plagiarism, obviously.
Peter, TA is teaching assistant?
I'm sorry?
TA is teaching assistant?
Oh, sorry, teaching assistant. Yes,
Yeah.
sorry. Yes. In your day, maybe there were lecturers in the university. Then gradually this thing came in. Oh, well, you see, lecturers are now supposed to go out and bring in money by finding research contracts or other kinds of contracts. There are research assistants who actually do the research, and then there are people who in the past might have been called scholars. They've now been regraded as TAs. Well, graduate TAs are the sort of new ones at the bottom of the pile. And even now in the US, universities pay graduate TAs a pittance anyway, but even that, 2,500 semesters, it's going to be undercut, I think. Lecturers, well, we're not going to do so well either. Recorded lectures from Harvard, designed for massive, I've forgotten what the OEC stands for. We had a guy who gave me a talk on it.
Massive open online course.
An online course, right. With follow-up, now this is the really interesting bit. The people who designed this course, it actually happened to be a course on artificial intelligence, amusingly, with a bloke called Norvig, who is the co-author of one of the famous textbooks. They designed this thing, but they ran it in parallel with the real one done by them actually lecturing. And one of the interesting things was that not merely did the people remotely who were taking this MOOC see the remote pictures, they also got follow-up online questions and answers used for revise and refresh. And lo and behold, this turned out to be very popular. So then the students thought, well, why do we bother turning up for these lectures? We'll just do that, and we'll use these QAs. So rather to the horror and shock of the lecturers concerned, they identified that their own students were preparing the stuff in this form. Now, English universities, as we know, depend on something like £9,000 per course, per student. The students are now graduating with something like 44,000 average debt. My question is, as this sort of technique comes in, charging this sort of money is going to be unsustainable unless you go to an elite university where you can say, but I trained along with X, Y, Z, P, and Q, who were very smart, and they're doing this, that, and the other. You know, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Universities doing run-of-the-mill stuff, I don't think they're going to be able to hold on to that kind of thing. But watch this space. Now, back to economic consequences. I discovered from this book, which I hadn't met before, a thing called Bowley's Law. Since the 1850s, labour gets about 67% of the GDP. You know, I said that there was that line going steadily up. As the GDP goes up, the hourly wage rates go up. And roughly speaking, about 67% of the money, and then the capitalists get the rest. Recently, this has dropped to about 54%. They don't quite know because there are a very, very small number of people, you probably read this statistic, that is it 1% or 0.1% of the population has the same wealth as the half of the worst paid half of the world, something like that. Anyway, 54%, but I mean, there has been a big drop. Labour is getting less and less of its share of the available money. This is the crucial point. The economic surplus created by the robots is going to the capitalists and the very few. Another problem, high unemployment leads to a shortage of demand. Now this is a very big worry for economists. I mean, Keynes's whole theory was really addressing this, trying to say under certain situations, particularly if you've got deflation, how can you create some more demand? What can you do? If it so happens that most people are unemployed, who is going to go to the shops and actually buy these goods? It's all really well having these robots churning it out. I don't know if you saw the news program, I think it was on BBC Newsnight last night, showing apparently there are masses and masses of container ships which are being used to transport stuff to and from China, suddenly laid up. You know, there isn't that much stuff to be transported. The Baltic Exchange, which does bulk transfer of grain, particularly iron ore, coal, things of that kind. Ships that used to be £250,000 a day higher are now available for 2,500. I mean, these are big figures. This is right now I'm talking about. So just the shock that's happened in China just recently has been enough to cut down, and suddenly you get shortage of demand. Well, shortage of demand for these big ships. These big ships, of course, carry a lot of the goods that normally go into shops and get bought. The shortage of demand feeds through. Now, Martin Ford makes this suggestion that maybe we have to think about paying everyone a basic living wage. Now, when he says basic living wage, I think you might say a kind of minimal wage, a safety net type wage. But in order to create stable demand, there have to be people who've got money in their pockets who can actually go into the shops and buy things. It's been suggested before. Amazingly, it's been suggested back in the 50s by Hayek, who is normally considered to be a very right-wing economist, way to the right of George Osborne or something like that. Well, even he thought, and he was a famous Nobel Prize-winning economist, under certain circumstances, this might be the way to do it. And I certainly think that there's a lot in this. One of the ways to think about it is this. There are things people can do and that people like doing. Maybe this will make self-employment viable. There are a lot of people who have certain skills. If they try to set up themselves in competition with what's available at the moment, they're skilled, they have to charge too much for their tea room or whatever. If everybody was paid a basic living wage, then these people are only having to add on a bit to the basic living wage to make themselves viable, and also there's more customers who've got money in their pockets who will be able to come and do these things. So that is an interesting possibility. I've actually been reading, before I came out, a bit from his book about this whole business. Roughly speaking, apparently, if you paid everybody in Britain £10,000 a year, ballpark, it would have to be, obviously, people of working age 20 to 65, cost roughly 400 billion, ballpark. But you don't anymore have to have all these cunning things like, what was it, job seekers allowance and somebody else's allowance and something else allowance, and all these different various forms of unemployment allowance. And that apparently is already costing us about 200 billion. So, roughly speaking, it's only 200 billion extra you have to find. And if by doing that, which you would have to raise some taxes in order to do, well, everybody groans about raising taxes. But if that then gets the economy going and all these other things sort of spring into life, that might be the way forward. But we seem to be reaching a tipping point where we really have to consider this kind of way of doing things. Now, the assumption has always been, okay, more education, as he says here. The universal assumption about the nature of the unemployment problem was more education or more vocational training is always the solution. With the proper training, workers will continuously climb the skills ladder, somehow staying just ahead of the machines. They will do more creative work, more, quotes, blue sky thinking. There is apparently no limit to what average people can be educated and trained to do, and likewise no limit to the number of high-level jobs the economy can create to absorb all these newly trained workers. Education and retraining, it seems, are a solution that is immutable across time. Well, you can obviously see that he is very doubtful about whether you really can. There really is no limit to what average people can be educated to do, and no limit to the number of high-level jobs you can create. And just a little bit later, he says, the reality is that awarding more university degrees, which has been happening, does not increase the fraction of the workforce engaged in the professional, technical and managerial jobs that most graduates would like to land. Instead, the result very often is credential inflation. Many occupations that once required only 3 A levels are now only open to those with a 3-year undergraduate degree. The master's becomes the new bachelor's. Degrees from non-elite universities are devalued. We are running up against a fundamental limit, both in terms of the capabilities of the people being herded into universities and the number of high-skilled jobs that will be available for them if they manage to graduate. The problem is the skills ladder is not really a ladder at all. It is a pyramid, and there is only so much room at the top.